Religion, for better or for worse, is part of the wholeness of a person, and someone's religious beliefs, just like people were interested, quite rightly, in Boris Johnson's infidelities. They were interested in Rishi Sunak's tax affairs. They're interested in Keir Starmer's previous public career. Someone's faith is I think, probably part and parcel of that. If you put yourself forward for election, you have to expect to be able to defend your faith.
Reverend Fergus Butler-Gallie, hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm very well, it's nice to be here.
Lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about your new book, Touching Cloth, which is a memoir as your time as a young priest. We're going to get into it. I loved it. It's a really fantastic, really funny book. Before we get into it, could you please just introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Reverend Fergus Butler-Gallie. I am a priest and writer, and it's lovely to be here. I've written 3 books, but this one is the first one that's sort of about priesthood and about my time actually ministering in the church, mostly in the great city of Liverpool, which I loved. And so it's partly a book about me, it's partly a book about the church, it's partly a book about the people I encountered there, but it's also a book about the city as well. So it's sort of everything and nothing, which my publishers told me I shouldn't call it that, because that don't sell any copies. But it's the truth.
I agree with you about the great city of Liverpool. Fantastic city. Always enjoy my time there. And I'm going to ask you the question you've probably been asked every single day for the past 5 years, or however long. Why did you become a priest?
Well, I say in the book, and my kind of stock comedy answer is, I was told black was slimming. Your viewers will be able to judge whether that's actually true.
And me as well.
Yeah, quite. Yeah, we're slightly quite coordinated. You've got that. So the tick is sort of doing the imitation of a clerical.
I'm like cool priest.
yeah, we're too uncool and cool.
I'm going to turn the chair around.
Why did I become a priest? Yeah, I always used to say because black was slimming. The truth is, I don't know. I think people expect there's a moment where you get a thunderbolt. You're midway through doing something completely inappropriate, and suddenly God hits you and you say, all right, stop doing that, go and be a priest. That was not the way for me. I was not brought up in a religious family. I didn't go to church, encounter the church as a kid. I think like a lot of people, it was something I knew about. I knew it was there. I knew what church was. I knew that people who looked like they'd been to the vets were vicars. I knew that there were some people who went there, but I probably thought they were a bit weird and I didn't really have anything to do with that. I guess I reached a point where slowly, opposite of suddenly, slowly but surely, I came to think, hang on, I think there might be something in this. And then you start to think, well, if there's something in this, what does that mean for me? And what should I do about that? And slowly but surely, I came to this conclusion that this is what I felt I had to do. So I don't think that there was any road to Damascus or burning bush or any of those biblical things. It was just slowly but surely, I stopped running out of excuses why not to be a priest.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Is that... What do you mean by that? What were the reasons to not be a priest that you were?
My personality, my temperament, my kind of hatred of waking up in the morning, the fact that days I wake up and sometimes I think I don't believe in God, right? That happens. But a very wise, in fact, I'm doing the funeral of this priest on Saturday. A very wise priest said to me, he said, it's like an itch, right? Get an itch in the middle of the night. And you think, I'm going to ignore that. I'm not going to itch it. That's the wrong thing to do. And then you stay awake and you stay awake and you stay awake until you think, you know what? What I'm going to do is try and itch this. And sometimes you itch it and the itch goes away. But sometimes you need to keep on itching, right? So for me, it was a bit like that. And this priest said to me, David Michaels was his name, a great man. And he said, look, you either give it a go now or you leave it. And the itch might go away. Itches do go away. But he said, my bet is you'll need to itch it again. So essentially, I kept on finding reasons why I didn't want to do it or why I wanted to go elsewhere or other things I might do. And slowly but surely, those excuses would disappear. Yeah. Or someone would say, actually, why don't you come and do this church thing? Or why don't you come and do that? So it kind of became something that I guess I said yes to, thinking, right, well, going to the panel where they decide whether you're mentally fit basically to do it. I thought, right, well, obviously they're going to say no. Last kind of person they want is me. At least now I can knock this on the head and say, right, I explored that to the absolute maximum point that I could. and now I can go and get on with a real life and go and do whatever it was I thought I was going to do. And that didn't happen. So every time I kept on trying to find a reason why not, those reasons were taken away. So yeah, that's sort of what I mean.
That's interesting, because I suppose, in my mind, you are the type of person that the church would try to attract, in that you're young.
Yeah, they're not great at attracting them.
No, because recently, like, I suppose what makes you interesting isn't just that you're a priest; it's that you're religious at all. It's particularly rare amongst under 40s. It's the first time in England and Wales that more people are more likely to declare they have no religion than they're Christian. Which in my head doesn't seem like that should be a new thing. Like I don't know terribly many religious people.
No.
What do you think in this kind of new march of like agnosticism or even atheism? What is the role of the church then?
I think what's interesting is that distinction between agnosticism and atheism. Because if you look at the stats, people actively declaring themselves as sort of atheists and humanists has gone down as well, which is an interesting thing. So I think we're in a bit, as we are politically, I would suggest, as we are in all kinds of things, I think there is quite a big no man's land, to be honest. Not that you should see it as, atheism in one trench and the church in the other, kind of chucking crap at each other over mud, though that does sometimes happen. I think, what is the church meant to do in that situation? Well, I think in many ways it's an opportunity for the church to look at itself and say, well, what are we doing wrong? What are the aspects of how we present ourselves that are not working? But it's also a chance to restate what does work, right? And I guess I'm very sympathetic. I mean, I came from that background. As I say, I was not brought up in the church-going background, and for most of my kind of teenage years, I would have absolutely said, I was probably on the more atheist side of things. I just thought this stuff is rubbish. So I guess, as you say, in some ways, for me, growing up, I'm 30 now, it was nothing new, right? I didn't know many religious people when I was a kid. My parents and grandparents were not especially religious. So I guess I suppose where I am different perhaps is that for some people, they come from religious backgrounds. They come from like a world where people did go to church. God was, real on a day-to-day basis. They were brought up in religious families. For me, that was never the case. It was always an active decision to come into this world. So I guess what the church should perhaps do is try and think a bit more about what that means. What does it mean to take an active step as opposed to kind of coasting on the passive idea that most people are Christian. They might not go to church. I mean, the majority of people have not gone to a Church of England service in this country since the 19th century, right? The kind of growth of religious pluralism and then the breakdown of attendance is a long-term phase, right? And every generation has said the church is going to die, the church is going to die, the church is going to die. It's gone down below this number. This many people haven't ticked the box on the census. So on one level, I don't think there's anything new, but that isn't to do down the challenge. I think the church's challenge is to say, okay, well, right, we're now in a situation where to be involved with us is an active step. How do we make that active step seem even faintly worthwhile?
I suppose what the church does have in its corner is people still go to church to get married, for funerals, etc. And I really doubt that tradition is going to be taken over by a more humanist thing. I think even like my parents don't go to church, but I imagine both of them would want to be buried in a Christian service.
Yeah. I think partly those are things the church does well, right? And I guess we have to work out, the difficult thing about admitting that is like, well, by inference, we're doing the rest of it pretty badly. So it's kind of like, well, okay, what is right about this stuff? What is the rooting that this gives? And I think, speak of the generation I come from, I do think there's a great kind of urge for some roots. You look at adverts on the tube, it's all about, how do I sign up to this thing? How do I tick this box? How do I become part of that group, et cetera, et cetera. Like, great, fine, good. That should be an opportunity for the church. I think, the idea of what we call hatch, match, dispatch, christenings, weddings, burials. No, I don't think that will go away. And that's partly because I think that speaks of something very deep. And people, it's funny, there was before the pandemic a big kind of rise in this idea of the no frills funeral. People are like, I don't want a funeral, I just want to get it over and done with, don't want to have people coming to it, go and have a drink in my honour, blah, 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 but we'll have this paid for, done remotely. Of course, in the pandemic, people had to have that. They didn't have the choice. And a lot of people realise that actually that's shit.
Yeah, it's bleak.
It's really bleak, and it's really miserable. And we can trick ourselves into thinking we live in this atomised world where we can do everything ourselves, but it's not true. It isn't true. No. And we still fall in love, and we still get angry, and we still have people we care about, etc., etc. And actually, what the church does is say, okay, there are moments in your life where coming together and marking that in a way that it's serious but also joyful, in a place where people have done that for literally thousands of years, is kind of a good thing. Now, that isn't just to say that the Church of England isn't the only option in that regard. I think that's true of Islam, I think it's true of Judaism, of Catholicism, etc. And I think there are people who probably will have a humanist conception of that. But I think on the whole, the fact is that that is the business of the church. It is still the biggest doer of that stuff. And so if it can do it well, it ought to be saying, hang on guys, this is what we're actually half decent at. Why don't you come along?
Do you think the church has a conception of that, as in that, or what does the church recognise that its traditional role is like under threat, or perhaps different to what it was 50, 60 years ago?
I think it does. I'm not sure whether it realises the way best to do that, because I think the way the church currently, the church is kind of like a teacher being desperately trying to be cool with sixth form kids, or there's an element of cringe about the church when it tries too hard, and I think sometimes it does try too hard, particularly around these areas. And actually, what you want is someone saying, like, look, this is what we're good at, we're going to do the best for you that we can in this scenario, not how do we bend over backwards to be, what we think you want us to be, which actually isn't what you want us to be. So I think they probably do get that they're losing a share of the market, full stop. But I think their attitude to that is to become more like market forces. I would suggest, actually, the way you cut across that is to say, actually, we aren't part of that whole, we'll offer you this in this venue with this, that and the other. Make this exactly how you want. It's to say, look, this is what we do. And people know that, on the whole, we do this all right.
Yeah.
Lean into your strengths, not try and make it different, because I think then you begin to shed some of that awareness in people's heads that they can go. Now, of course, the caveat on that is people have actually got to go to a church service and it not a wedding or a funeral and it not be crap. That is the kind of the big bottom line, that when they go, it's got to be decent. Mm-hmm. But I think on the whole, actually, the clergy are pretty good at that and the church is pretty good at that. The question is, how do they sort of say, look, this is what we've got, come and see, as opposed to, we are desperate to have you, how do we bend over backwards to make that happen? Because actually, when anyone does that, be it a brand or an institution or a friend, it's actually not very appealing.
No, it's not.
Everyone knows that.
It's pretty dreadful.
It is bad, it's sad.
You don't want to see like the Church of England TikTok on like stuff like that.
It's tragic.
Which I imagine that's on like a vision board.
That will be in Lambeth Palace. Someone will have been paid vast amounts of money from a consultancy firm to tell them that.
I'd love to have that job. Be paid thousands of pounds to tell the Church of England to make a TikTok.
To have a TikTok.
Yeah. I'm going to look that up after.
I can't wait. I bet it's there. It'll be there.
I'm going to insert a clip here of the Church of England TikTok.
Please do.
What I find interesting about the Church of England is, I'm a complete outsider to it, is it being Scottish. I'm not like, my mum's Catholic, my dad's Protestant. I was vaguely christened at home. Yeah. So I've never been to an Anglican service, but the Church of England plays...
Lucky you.
You're supposed to be selling the Church of England. Sorry. I think what is so interesting is how entrenched the church is constitutionally. King Charles is the defender of the faith, head of the Church of England. There's 26 bishops in the House of Lords.
Yeah, it's the second biggest owner of property in the country, or maybe the third after the Ministry of Defence, the Crown. It educates just over a third of all primary school children, a quarter of secondary school children. And it has a presence in every community, right? The whole point of the Church of England is, whether you like it or not, you're in a Church of England parish. We are sat here. Someone is technically in charge of our souls whilst we're in this. You have to always say how quickly you say our souls, because if you say our souls too quickly, it becomes...
So it's both, in some senses.
Yeah, technically both. But someone is in charge of your spiritual well-being, right? That is the idea. And part of the glory of the Church of England is that being linked to the Constitution and the idea of the state means it sort of has to be an all-services provider, right? So you can go along to your Church of England church and say, hey, I don't believe in God, or whatever, but I live in your parish, and it is their legal obligation to marry you or to give you what you need spiritually. So in many ways it's the kind of precursor, and it's absolutely fascinating that when the Beveridge report comes out in the 1940s, which gives birth to the welfare state, firstly the key authors are both the Archbishops of Canterbury and York, and the people involved, Beveridge himself, they are very devout churchmen who basically model the idea of a comprehensive public service on the way the Church of England works. Doctors still meet in deaneries, which is a clerical term, right? So much of how actually the rest of Britain operates, and England in particular, is weirdly based on the operation of the Church of England, because it was the first nationalised industry, right? It was the first thing to be taken under saying, okay, we're going to do this here for everybody in this place. And there'll be some people who opt out, there'll be some people for whom it doesn't work, but actually the idea is that this will offer a comprehensive cover for everybody in this place at this time. And of course, quite naturally, you then become quite enmeshed with the state, right? You say, okay, well, there needs to be some oversight of this both ways. It can't simply be this thing exists and it's totally separate from all of the other operations of what it means to live in England. So yeah, it is still very enmeshed. And again, there is a debate to be had about that, about whether the fact that now fewer people believe in God, fewer people identify themselves as Anglicans, as members of the C of E, whether that means that should be picked apart. But my kind of attitude to that is that not everybody is sick all the time, and not everybody, we're not always in a war, but you wouldn't want to get rid of the kind of national things. And I think on the whole, having a kind of space where you say, okay, faith exists, we acknowledge it. We can't say that we live in a purely secular society isn't possible, because to say the whole point of religion is it's done in public. And if you say you can't practice religion in public, you're no longer actually secular. You are abolishing it. So to say, okay, here is this weird, imperfect, like the NHS, like the armed services, like any of these other things. This thing, is it perfect? No. Does it offer a space whereby this stuff can be explored and done sort of safely, as opposed to falling into the hands of extremists? That's not a bad thing, in my opinion. But yeah, I think there is a debate to be had. And again, whether we've got all the jamboree of the coronation coming up soon, the Church of England will play a role in that. It'll probably do it quite well. It tends to do those big moments in a way that people think, oh, you know what? You got the pros in, it was all right. They didn't drop anything. No one, kicked Camilla or anything like that midway through the service. But it will inevitably ignite that debate again, which, I think people have been having since the English Civil War and before. So nothing new under the sun. And will probably happen in the next Civil War. 100%, 100%. I think you talked about public debate there, public debate being ignited, which I suppose is just the new cycle that we exist in, isn't it? And it was once again ignited during the leadership election for the SNP, when Kate Forbes made comments suggesting about she was not in favour of same-sex marriage. She made clear she was not. She thinks everyone had the right to do what they wanted, but she personally opposed same-sex marriage, sex outside marriage, anything that wasn't. And there was people were making the argument that she was coming under scrutiny because she was a person of faith, rather than because of the comments themselves. I just wondered, what did you make of that? Well, I think anyone who puts themselves forward for public office has to expect to come under scrutiny, right? And that we would expect that on anyone's private beliefs, I think. If someone runs for power and says, I think all cats should be killed, plenty of people might agree with them on that. They might be like, oh, dogs are great. But fundamentally, that is a private belief. And then they said, but I wouldn't pass a cat-killing bill. That would be far too far. But a cat comes in my house, it's getting its head stomped on, right? There is a kind of inevitability to, I don't know, anyone who wears Crocs, that's wicked and bad and wrong. Get rid of them, send them into prison. I would never introduce a bill, but Crocs are bad. Religion, for better or for worse, is part of the wholeness of a person, and someone's religious beliefs, just like people were interested quite rightly in Boris Johnson's infidelities. They were interested in Rishi Sunak's tax affairs. They're interested in Keir Starmer's previous public career. Someone's faith is I think, probably part and parcel of that. If you put yourself forward for election, you have to expect to be able to defend your faith. Now, you might say that, well, if that was the main thing they could get on Kate Forbes, then perhaps she was squeaky clean in all the other areas. That's probably not a bad thing if that was the only thing that people could go for was her faith. But I think it's kind of inevitable. And I think the interesting thing about her is that she comes from what we would call in the Church of England and what the Church of Scotland would call the nonconformist tradition. People who have said, actually, that broad tent that you've got in both the Church of England and the Church of Scotland, which are the two established churches in the two countries, subtly different. Church of England has bishops, Church of Scotland doesn't. But for you to say, actually, I'm part of the Free Church of Scotland, or the other people compare as Tim Farron in England is part of a kind of independent church congregation. For you to say, actually, that broad thing, I actively wish to step out of that.
It's too broad.
It's too broad, yeah, literally, it's too broad. I am a member of the community of the saved. It's a very Protestant idea, and indeed has its parallels in politics, right? Where purity becomes a problem, both on the left and the right. You say, no, the party has gone too far towards some kind of compromise. It's got to be tagged back, or I'll leave. Which you see politicians doing all the time. That is essentially the church equivalent of that, saying, this lot in the middle, it's too broad. I am taking an active step to be part of a different church. So that in itself is a statement, and so that's why I think perhaps there are plenty of clergy. Theresa May didn't really get asked about her faith, but I think politicians rather who make that decision to actively step outside those boundaries and say, no, I am part of this thing that defines itself by being different, then inevitably you're going to get questions, I think. There was the debate about whether it was unfair that Hamza Yousaf didn't get the same levels of questioning when he had abstained on the same-sex marriage bill as well, and had refused to be drawn on whether he personally believed it was right. So I think, but I wonder whether that was less to do with Christianity, more perhaps to do with being the insurgent candidate. Yousaf was the kind of SNP establishment's chosen. Yeah.
I also think Yousaf has been verbally socially liberal.
Yeah,
he's been made affirmations.
Right. I think there's probably a more interesting, broader question there about what is the SNP for. Yeah. And to what extent can its coalition ever be kept together when you have people who are deeply socially conservative, people who are deeply socially liberal, particularly when they're seeking to be a party of government rather than a party of protest. I think to my mind it was more of a political question than a religious one. But I think there is that. But again, this is a long running. We had the Test and the Corporations Act. Catholics for a long time in England had to, were constantly being asked, well, are you sure you can swear allegiance to this established aspect of what we do, because you have these stated beliefs that are very different. How will you vote on the pill or abortion, etc. in the 1960s? So I don't think the scrutiny is anything new. Perhaps the idea that a religious person shouldn't be part of politics is a creeping one. But again, I don't really think that has many legs, because as I say, religion happens in public and so does politics, so you're going to get overlap. Yeah. I was concerned that we were going to get drawn into an hour-long debate about the SNP. The nature of we'll get to,
no, not at all.
1979 by-elections or whatever.
I would have enjoyed it, but I'm not sure.
Next time, folks. We don't have time. That's what we're going to do. Just you wait.
Yeah, you'll be back next week for our SNP special. Let's come to the book now. It's obviously a very personal story about your experience as being a priest, and what I really took from it is that you seem to love being a priest. Yeah. And it seems to be. You talk about it not being a career, you make that point. It's more than that. I wondered, what would you say your best day of being a priest was?
Oh, my best day of being a priest. Genuinely, there are too many, but I do remember I remember some funerals where you think, you know what, I have made a difference on that day. There are times when you visited people in hospital and you just see their face go. One of the best ones I ever had in hospital. It's quite early on, and obviously you wear a stupid outfit as a priest, so people notice you. And it was in the Royal Hospital in Liverpool, which famously there is a brand new PFI built hospital directly opposite, which they can't go into because they screwed up the carillon or something went bust. And there was this decaying 70s hospital where you get in the lift and you whether you are religious or not, you say a prayer because it is properly creaking. And I went to visit the old Royal, which is still there, as I say, and went to see a parishioner who had he'd had a tough time. He'd had proper surgery. It was really big, and he'd come out of it, and he was very thankful. He said, "Oh, come and have a visit." So I went to go and see him, and as I walked in, I was in my full gear. I saw his face light up, but there were these two guys in the beds opposite. It was quite an intensive ward. There's just 4 of them in. And they had clearly, again, gone through trachea surgery or something like that. And but they were sat up in bed. And they saw me come in. And one of them goes, "Oh, someone's for it, the priest's here." The idea, a priest comes into hospital and visits someone in bed, it's like, well, they're screwed, right? They're going to die. And the guy next to him went, no. Doctor comes in, fine. Priest comes in, fine. If a lawyer comes in, you're fucked. And that made me laugh so much. It was such a sort of humanising moment. I was quite nervous. Everyone was there. These guys had gone through surgery. They would have, there was a serious chance of them dying under. And just the group of us laughing at this kind of gag. So there were a lot of human moments like that. And again, moments of sort of big privilege as well, doing, as I say, people's funerals, being with people as they died, which, again, not many people get to do. This is where it's quite countercultural. I have been there as people have left this earth, as their families have been around them, and it's a very moving and a very privileged thing to do, to be there and be part of that, and to give comfort to them as they die, and as the people around them lose someone very close to them. So those are some of the best days. I mean, there's also hilarious days where you just take a moment and think, how the hell did I get into this situation? What on earth possessed me to enter a world whereby I could be, I had one where I had to ring up a dog. Someone's dog was at the other end of the phone, and the dog was at a dangerous dog's hearing. So I had to pray down the phone to this dog on the other end. I said, "He's not saying anything." I said, "Of course he's not, he's a dog." There are moments like that where you just have to sit down and you have to kind of say, like, yeah, this wouldn't happen in any other job, and you have to laugh. So a mix of those would be the best day, I think.
Yeah.
The kind of the real privilege, but also the moments when you think, I couldn't be doing this anywhere else.
No. But I imagine the flip side of that is, I imagine there's some really taxing days. And so I wondered what your worst day as a priest has been.
Well, I mean, you don't do something like, the funeral of a child and think, oh, that was a banging day at work.
Yeah.
That knocks it out of you. And part of the problem of both, I think, funerals, weddings, and any kind of big moment like that is your job is to take the kind of charge, the emotional energy, and to give people who are there in the pews the permission to just completely break down, because that's what they need to do, right? That's how grief works. And they should feel able to sort of properly collapse into their grief, because only when they do that will they have any chance of coming back and out through it. And so you are having to draw to yourself quite a lot of emotional energy. And that can be taxing. It's funny, you can feel like you've trekked up a mountain at the end of a day like that, because you're shattered. So days like that, like any job, look, there are days where I spent the whole day in front of a bloody form filling in like just admin. And those are crap, because they're just boring and they're not what you're there to do. And often you know that file will be going to the special filing cabinet they have in Church House, which is straight in the shredder, and you will have spent ages filling it in. And you think, this is keeping me away from what I was actually called to do. Otherwise, there's some quite, the church has a lot of faults and a lot of failings, and there are some really nasty people who are part of the Church of England, and there are some really corrupt aspects of it, and there are some things that it has got really wrong. And I have had days where I've essentially come up against that, and that does kick you in a kind of different way, I think, because you think, okay, for all those great moments, there's all this going on as well, and this institution that I have seen do so much good can also do this, like, I would use the word evil, frankly, in terms of how it treats people and how it behaves and how it covers up abuse and how it does all that. So I would say actually deep down my worst days as a priest have been going through the kind of encountering some of that stuff face to face, having to report that, having to engage with that, and that's pretty grim.
Yeah. In the face of that, then, what kind of gives you hope for the future?
Well, I'm contractually obliged to say God, obviously. That's the advantage. I'm a really pessimistic person. I'm really cynical. Every time I think someone says, "Oh, someone handed in my wallet on the Jubilee line and it's restored my faith in humanity," I'm like, "Well, whoop-de-doo, that's great."
They nicked a tenner.
Yeah,
so.
good for you. Yeah, exactly. Got all your card details
Yeah.
and they've gone off there in Lanzarote right now. I don't have faith in humanity. I don't have faith in myself. I don't have faith in. I think I have to have almost a supernatural optimism because I am very cynical about the world and the direction of things. But I do have hope, and actually, I do see ordinary people doing incredible things, and that was the great privilege of my job. It was, I saw food banks and refugee acceptance schemes and legal aid pathways. I saw visiting the sick and burying the dead, baptizing the young and marrying people. I saw the church doing what the church should do. And as long as there's still, it's a famous thing in the 19th century when they thought the church was going down the shitter again, as people have thought, as I say, for generations. There's a guy called John Keble, and he said, "I just keep telling myself, as long as the Church of England exists in my parish, it still exists." And I think that's all priests can do, is say, if I can see one act of decency and goodness today enabled by the church, that makes this worth it. So that's where I have to keep my hope, I guess.
Excellent. Fergus Butler-Gallie, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Your new book, Touching Cloth, is available now. It's excellent. Would highly recommend
Thank
it
you.
to everyone. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.